The alien fleet arrived in the dead of night, though such a distinction was meaningless in the vastness of space. Thousands of warships, each bristling with weapons capable of turning planets to ash, drifted into formation above Earth. The lead vessel, a hulking behemoth of obsidian metal, bore the insignia of the HFY Dominion, a vast empire that had subjugated world after world with merciless efficiency. On board this flagship, Supreme Commander HFY Thursday stood before a massive viewport, arms clasped behind his back. His deep-set eyes, like twin pools of liquid onyx, scanned the world below with a mix of disdain and amusement. "This is the Resistance," he murmured, voice laced with condescension. "A fractured species, barely scratching at the edges of interstellar travel." His second-in-command, a wiry officer named Kareth, clicked his mandibles in agreement. "They sent us a message, Commander. A warning." HFY Thursday scoffed. "A warning? Do tell." Kareth tapped a control panel, and the transmission from Earth's Defense Council played. A human, middle-aged, composed, with the hard gaze of someone who had seen war, spoke in flawless galactic standard. "This is General Elias Carter of the Earth Defense Coalition. You are trespassing in soul space. You will receive one warning. Leave now. If you do not, we will be forced to defend our home." The message ended. Silence stretched across the command deck before breaking with laughter. First from Kareth, then rippling through the other officers. Even HFY Thursday chuckled, shaking his head. "How quaint," he mused. "They still believe words hold power against inevitability." He turned to his tacticians. "What forces do they have?" Kareth flicked a claw over a holomap, pulling up intelligence reports. "They have planetary defense satellites, a handful of crude spacefaring vessels, and an orbital network designed for early warning rather than true combat." He sneered. "Their technology is outdated. We have nothing to fear." HFY Thursday exhaled slowly, a predatory smile creeping across his lips. "Then let us remind them of their place." On Earth, the mood was tense, but not frantic. Deep within a military command bunker, General Carter leaned over a tactical display, watching the alien fleet's slow, inevitable descent. "They're ignoring the warning," an aide murmured. Carter's jaw tightened. "Of course they are." Across the room, a young officer, Lieutenant Daniels, rubbed his temples. "You'd think after conquering so many worlds, they'd recognize an obvious setup." "Arrogance makes you blind," Carter replied. "They've never lost. They don't believe they can." Daniels let out a low chuckle. "Guess we'll be the first to teach them." There was a silence before Carter turned to his communications officer. "Send them one last message." The transmission was short. "You have been warned." On the VA SIL flagship, the final message was met with more laughter. "Enough theatrics," HFY Thursday said, waving a hand dismissively. "Charge weapons." "We end this now." Kareth nodded, issuing commands through the fleet's neural link. Cannons hummed with energy. Missile silos unlocked. Beams of light illuminated the void, primed for annihilation. But before the order to fire could be given, something strange happened. A few officers stiffened. One of them turned sharply to a display, eyes narrowing. "Commander, I'm detecting an anomaly." VA Thursday frowned. "Elaborate." "They're satellites." The officer hesitated, checking and rechecking his readings. "They're not just for early warning. They're moving, reconfiguring into a new formation." VA Thursday's amusement flickered, replaced by curiosity. "So they do have tricks." "No matter. Destroy them." Orders were given. The first wave of fire launched toward Earth's defenses. It never arrived. The moment the alien weaponry crossed a certain threshold, it simply vanished. No explosion, no impact, just gone. Silence fell over the command deck. "Report," VA Thursday snapped. The tactical officer's voice was tight. "Our attacks, our weapons, cease to exist. There's no trace of them. That's impossible." VA Thursday's fingers dug into the armrest of his throne-like command seat. "Try again." A second volley. Same result. A third. Panic crept into Kareth's voice. "Sir, I don't understand." Then, without warning, one of the smaller alien frigates disappeared. Not destroyed. not damaged. One moment it was there, then it wasn't. The bridge was dead silent. Another ship vanished. Then another. A ripple of dread slithered through Thursday's spine. Impossible, he whispered. Kareth, struggling to form words, turned to his commander. What kind of weapon is this? VA Thursday had no answer. On Earth, in the command bunker, General Carter watched the screens, arms crossed. Daniels let out a low whistle. They're starting to realize. Carter exhaled. Took them long enough. Daniels smirked. Think we should tell them how it works? Carter chuckled, shaking his head. Let them wonder. The alien fleet was in chaos now. Officers barked conflicting orders. Ships tried to maneuver away, but the unseen force consuming them was inescapable. Every vessel that attempted to fire, erased. Every ship that reached a certain proximity, gone. VA Thursday's hands clenched into fists. His empire had crushed countless civilizations, their weapons unstoppable. And yet here, in this remote corner of the galaxy, against a species they had deemed weak, they were losing, and they didn't even know how. For the first time in his long, decorated career, Supreme Commander VA Thursday felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. Panic spread through the VA SIL fleet like a virus. One by one, warships disappeared, their hulking forms dissolving into nothingness without sound or explosion. No wreckage remained. No energy signatures marked their destruction. It was as if they had never existed at all. Supreme Commander VA Thursday's breath came in shallow, controlled bursts, but his claws dug into the armrests of his command throne. Every instinct screamed at him to act, to regain control, but how could one fight against an enemy whose weapons defied all logic? Status report, he barked. Kareth's mandibles twitched erratically as he worked at his console, his normally steady hands shaking. It's not a conventional attack, sir. There's no projectile, no energy discharge. Our ships are just gone. VA Thursday stood, his heavy boots thudding against the deck as he stormed toward the viewport. He had seen battlefields littered with the ruins of fallen enemies. He had watched cities crumble beneath orbital bombardments. But never had he seen a fleet being unmade, its destruction silent and absolute. His officers scrambled for answers. Some suggested a planetary cloaking field capable of refracting light to create an illusion, but such theories were rendered useless when ships at the very edge of the battle line, miles away from Earth's surface, began to vanish as well. Then, without warning, the viewport darkened. The flagship's sensors flickered and reset. And for the first time in his life, VA Thursday felt truly blind. We've lost contact with the outermost squadrons, Kareth whispered. They were there moments ago. A junior officer choked out. Now, there, his words died in his throat. One of the tactical screens updated. The formation of their fleet, once so imposing, had been reduced by a third. VA Thursday's mind raced. What was he fighting? Some form of gravitational weapon capable of collapsing matter into itself? A wormhole device, pulling his ships into another dimension? The only certainty was that they were losing. On Earth, General Carter watched the tactical display with the expression of a man who had already seen the outcome before the first move was made. Lieutenant Daniels leaned forward, eyes glinting with something between admiration and amusement. They're still trying to figure it out. Carter allowed himself the smallest of smiles. They always do. The defense system was working exactly as expected. The moment the alien fleet had crossed the boundary of Earth's protective grid, the failsafe had activated. The technology had been buried deep in classified archives, developed not as a weapon of war, but as a contingency, a final measure should humanity ever face annihilation. And now, the galaxy's most feared armada was learning firsthand what that measure entailed. Back in orbit, the VA SIL fleet was in full retreat. Or, at least, they were trying to be. The remaining ships pivoted sharply, engines burning bright as they attempted to flee the battlefield. The elegant formations of a once mighty force had devolved into chaos, a desperate scramble to escape the invisible predator that stalked them. VA Thursday turned to his navigations officer, his voice dangerously low. Get us out of here. The officer's face was ashen. Sir, we can't. For the first time, the mighty warlord's mask of control cracked. What? Kareth swallowed hard. Our warp drives are unresponsive. VA Thursday's blood chilled. He turned to the screens, scanning the data himself, willing the readings to change. But the truth was clear. Whatever weapon the humans had deployed, it was more than just an eraser of ships. It had severed the fleet from escape, and it was still closing in. At the outer edge of the battle, another VA SIL warship vanished. Then another. Entire sections of space became voids where fleets once hovered. Desperation clawed at VA Thursday's throat. His empire's conquest had always been swift, brutal, and decisive. Victory was assumed before the first shot was fired. And yet here, against an enemy the Dominion had dismissed as insignificant, he was watching his forces be unmade like grains of sand swept into the tide. The bridge was filled with erratic breathing, the quiet terror of warriors who had never before faced true helplessness. Then came the final insult, a message from Earth. It was audio only, transmitted in perfect galactic standard. The voice was calm, almost bored. Attention, VA SIL fleet. Your forces are being systematically removed. If you continue to persist, you will cease to exist entirely. This is your last opportunity to surrender. Surrender. VA Thursday had never heard the word directed at his people. It was absurd, unthinkable. A cornered beast still had its fangs. A wounded army could still fight. But how did one battle against an enemy whose weapon erased the very concept of resistance? Silence stretched across the bridge. Then a sound, a low, breathless chuckle. Kareth. VA Thursday turned to his second-in-command, watching as Kareth let out another laugh, high-pitched and disbelieving. You find this amusing? VA Thursday growled. Kareth wiped at his face, his mandibles twitching with hysteria. It's just we thought we were gods. He gestured at the screens, at the empty void where their fleet had once stood. And now look at us, running, dying. VA Thursday's hands clenched into fists, rage momentarily eclipsing his fear. He would not, could not allow this to be the end. With the flick of his wrist, he accessed the fleet-wide channel. His voice rang through the remaining ships, sharp as steel. This is Supreme Commander VA Thursday. All forces are to engage at full capacity. Fire everything. Do not stop. If this is to be our last stand, let it be one that echoes across the stars. It was a death order, but there was no alternative. Around the flagship, the surviving ships reoriented, abandoning their futile retreat. A final barrage was launched toward Earth, a storm of plasma, missiles, and energy blasts powerful enough to shatter moons. And yet, as before, the moment the weapons crossed the invisible threshold, they vanished. Erased. The last warship that had attempted to flee disappeared. VA Thursday could feel the trap tightening. He exhaled a slow, measured breath. So this was how it ended. He had conquered systems, broken empires, and reduced civilizations to whispers in history. But his legacy would not be one of glory. It would be one of caution, a lesson to those who came after. Humanity had never needed to conquer the stars, because the stars now feared them. VA Thursday stood rigid, his reflection cast in the obsidian glass of the flagship's main viewport. Where once the fleet of the VA SIL Dominion had dominated the space above Earth, only void remained. No burning wreckage, no lifeless debris, no trace of the warships that had once been the symbol of unstoppable conquest. The silence was suffocating. Kareth's mandibles twitched as he monitored the last remaining sensor feeds. All communications with the fleet are gone. His voice trembled, the weight of the moment sinking into his very bones. We are the last, Commander. The flagship, once the heart of an empire's war machine, now drifted alone. Around them, the invisible force that had swallowed their fleet crept ever closer, an unseen predator stripping them down to nothing. VA Thursday exhaled through gritted teeth, forcing himself to think beyond the horror clawing at his mind. He had commanded battles that stretched across solar systems, had crushed entire species beneath the weight of his warships, had watched planets burn in the name of the Dominion. And yet, he had never faced an enemy like this. The humans had not merely defeated them. They had erased them. His claws dug into the armrest of his throne. This was not war. War was destruction, fire and wreckage and bodies left in its wake. But here, in the black void of space, there was nothing. As if the fleet had never existed at all. A cold, creeping realization settled into his gut. The humans had never needed to fight. They had given their warning not as a bluff, nor as a desperate plea. They had given it because they already knew the outcome. Kareth's breath hitched. "Sir, incoming transmission." VA Thursday turned sharply. "From whom?" Kareth swallowed, mandibles clicking with apprehension. "Earth." The bridge fell into a hushed stillness as the human message flickered to life on the main screen. A single figure appeared, standing in a stark, metallic command center. The same man who had sent their first warning. General Elias Carter. His face was unreadable, his dark eyes steady as they bore into the Thursday zone. There was no triumph in his expression, no arrogance, no malice. Only certainty. "Commander VA Thursday." Carter's voice carried no inflection, no sign of anger or satisfaction. Just a statement of fact. "You have one choice." VA Thursday's throat tightened. He had given ultimatums before. Never had he been on the receiving end of one. Carter continued, unshaken. "You can stay." His gaze remained locked, steady, unrelenting. "And share the fate of your fleet." A slow breath filled VA Thursday's lungs, his chest rising and falling with measured restraint. "Or," Carter said, "you can leave. You can return to your dominion, carrying the lesson that has been taught here today." A heavy pause settled over the bridge, thick with something that had never touched VA Thursday before. Humiliation. His fleet, his legacy, had been reduced to a mere warning for others. Not an enemy defeated, not a battle lost, but a lesson. Kareth dared to break the silence. "Sir, what do we do?" VA Thursday turned to face him, and for the first time in his long, decorated career, he had no answer. No counterattack, no brilliant strategy, no vengeance to plot. The Dominion did not surrender. The Dominion did not retreat. These were truths etched into the very soul of their empire. And yet, as he stood on the deck of the last surviving warship, staring into the abyss where his armada had once been, another truth became undeniable. The Dominion could not fight something it did not understand. VA Thursday's claws retracted as his fingers curled into fists. "Set course away from this system," he ordered. His voice did not waver, though something deep inside him fractured as he spoke. Kareth hesitated, perhaps expecting resistance. When none came, he gave a short nod and turned to the navigation officers. The ship's engines hummed to life, thrusters igniting in slow submission. VA Thursday exhaled through his nose, casting one final glance at the blue and green world that had brought his empire to its knees. The humans had not won through superior firepower, nor sheer numbers. They had won because they had never truly been threatened in the first place. His mandibles tightened. What had the Dominion awakened? General Carter watched from the Earth Defense Coalition's command center as the last VA SIL warship drifted away from orbit, its retreat slow, reluctant, and absolute. The room remained silent. There were no cheers, no celebrations. Victory had been certain from the moment the enemy had arrived. Daniels exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "That's it." Carter didn't look away from the screen. "That's it." The lieutenant shook his head, a half-smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "You know, I almost feel bad for them." Carter's brow lifted slightly. "Almost." Daniel scoffed. "Let's not get carried away." The general allowed himself the smallest ghost of a smile before letting his expression settle into its usual unreadable calm. He had no doubt that VA Thursday would return to his dominion and spread the truth of what had transpired here today. Not a battle, not a war, a lesson. And that lesson would ripple outward, carried by whispers and warnings, until the stars themselves spoke the words that had been written into history this day. Do not challenge Earth. Not because humanity had built weapons of unparalleled devastation. But because no one would ever see those weapons, only the aftermath, a quiet, methodical erasure of anything that dared to threaten them. Carter turned away from the screen as the last red blip of the VA SIL ship disappeared beyond the Sol system. The stars had been watching, and now they knew